Ultima 4 Quest of the Avatar was one of my favorite games growing up. It stood out from many of its RPG contemporaries by making the whole point of the game to be a good person. No major villains, no damsels to rescue, just follow the path of virtue. I wrote an essay about my experience with the quest and even made a video review of it on the channel. Quest of the Avatar was my favorite game in the Ultima series and remained so for some time because it was such an enlightening experience. I don't know if it was time, nostalgia, or even me writing my own games recently, but I felt like I wanted to revisit the world of Britannia all these years later. I'd always heard Ultima 7 was one of the best games in the series, and the fact that it was just over $1 on GOG made it an easy purchase. When I initially started the game, I learned 200 years had passed since I, as the Avatar, had last visited. Everything was different, even though geographic locations were more or less the same. I liked this a lot because I actually felt like the Avatar in the game visiting an unfamiliar Britannia. Usually, Ultima games start by meeting with Lord British, who assigns the player a task, whether it's to rid the world of Exodus or become the Avatar. Ultima 7's journey starts with a red being called the Guardian taunting the Avatar.
Avatar! Know that Britannia has entered into a new age of enlightenment. Know that the time has finally come for the one true Lord of Britannia to take his place at the head of his people.
Then, things get gruesome. The Avatar is teleported to the city of Trinsic, only to find someone has been murdered in a brutal quartering. Nearby, an innocent gargoyle is also murdered for no apparent reason. There's blood everywhere. The townspeople are in shock. What in the world had happened to Britannia? You can investigate the crime scene and question potential witnesses. The victim's son Spark joins the party, and I learned more about a group called the Fellowship. For a second, I forgot this was a fantasy game as it felt more like a murder mystery. After answering some questions for the mayor and getting permission to leave the city, players can pretty much go anywhere they want. Do you want to find out more about what happened to the victims in Trinsic? Go ahead. Or do you just want to explore the world and forget about the crimes? You can do that too. In some ways, Ultima 7 is like a vast combination of puzzle pieces placed squarely against each other. The overworld map is seamless, which is super impressive considering the game is 30 years old. There's no loading screen from one area to the next. You go from town to overworld to dungeon and then back to the overworld without any transition screen. On a purely technical level, I don't think I've seen any other game, even modern ones on the PS5, that do that. There's not too many gates in the form of sudden difficulty spikes, though there are a few blockers in story form. You can also grab the magic carpet pretty early on, as it's just outside one of the dungeons that you can walk to. From there, you can fly anywhere. For my part, I followed the murder mystery. Two members of the Fellowship, Elizabeth and Abram, were seen in Trinsic on the night of the murder. Fortunately, just tracking them down will take players throughout the entirety of Britannia. On my quest to find the pair, I dropped by the different cities and talked to the various NPCs. I noticed a lake near the village of Cove that was badly littered, garbage everywhere. Miranda, who's a member of the Great Council of Britannia, wants to pass a law to clean things up at Loch Lake. She asked the Avatar to deliver a bill to the mayor of Cove, Lord Heather. Lord Heather approves, but I also learned that he'd fallen in love with Jana, who was one of my old party members, and joins us in this game as well. From the two, I learned all about the drama going on within Cove. Teeming social networks like this make the world feel interconnected. The NPCs have tons of dialogue options, as almost every single person has their own agenda and relationships. They gossip about people they don't like, or confess stronger feelings for someone who might not yet be aware of those feelings. You're not the only one keeping tabs on the people of Britannia.
Under my guidance, Britannia will flourish, and all of the people shall rejoice!
Some of the best parts of the game came through random exploration. There's a royal museum with exhibits of items from all the previous Ultima games, which is pretty cool to see. I love that there's shows scattered throughout showcasing dramatic performances. Many of the books have original content in them, which is a whole lot of writing for something that's completely optional. One time I came across a fortress called Serpent's Hold where someone's baby had been kidnapped. I found this baby while flying around and noticing a group of harpies who I dispatched. It was shocking to see this baby out in the middle of nowhere, who I then promptly rescued and returned. The game is really dark at times, exploring crimes like human trafficking. In New Magencia, I met a young woman named Constance, who's upset with her sweetheart Henry because he lost the golden locket he was supposed to give her. In the meantime, a gambler who's on the run from Buccaneer's Den, Robin, washes ashore. He promises Constance a life outside the island, and she's genuinely excited. But as I got to know Robin, I learned what he really wanted to do was to take Constance and sell her at the Buccaneer's Den so he could pay off his debts. He tried to trick me into helping him, and then eventually tried to get rid of me. I ended his shenanigans, but the whole situation was really disturbing. This was no longer the innocent world of Quest of the Avatar. It seems the people of Britannia are also painfully aware of this fact, which is why they're turning to the Fellowship. Despite everything the Avatar had done centuries ago, he'd been an absent hero. A lot of bad stuff has happened since I'd last been there, like a big drought that transformed the city of Paws into an impoverished region that has struggled with basic necessities. Everywhere I went, I felt a silent but damning condemnation through the situations the villagers have had to deal with by themselves. The virtues of the Avatar had failed these people. The Fellowship had filled that void. There's a digital manual included with the game called the Book of Fellowship, which is told from their leader's perspective, Batlin. He describes his life of struggle and how he sought a deeper meaning in his existence. Batlin mixes in the philosophical with the personal. His attitude towards the 8 virtues is mixed. On one hand, he says he supports them, but on the other hand, points out their flaws. I hereby wish to state that the Fellowship fully supports the 8 virtues of the Avatar, and as one who has endeavored to follow their examples, I can personally assure thee of their immeasurable worth. But as one who has followed the 8 virtues, I know whereof I speak when I say that it is impossible to perfectly live up to them. Even the Avatar was unable to do so continuously and consistently. Can anyone say that they have been honest every moment of every day of their lives? Can anyone say that they are always compassionate, valorous, just, sacrificing, honorable, humble, or spiritual at all times? The philosophy of the 8 virtues does little more than emphasize our own personal deficiencies. I have met many adherents to the ways of the virtues who are racked with guilt over what they perceive to be their spiritual failures, for that is what the virtues are based upon. It is a pretty damning statement, especially knowing the Fellowship is helping people throughout the world, giving people opportunities that otherwise wouldn't exist. Batlin declares, "Upon us is the age of the Fellowship," in which one does not simply wait in anticipation for a heroic savior when a crisis occurs. In this less spectacular but more practical day, we are left to solve our problems with our own minds and our own will. It's with this background in mind that I met up with Lord British. He was puzzled why I was there, and let me know that he wasn't the one to summon the Avatar as in the previous games, which made me wonder who'd actually brought me to Britannia. Surprisingly, Lord British encouraged me to interact with the Fellowship, describing them as a force for good. Mention of the murders reminded him there was a similar murder in Britannia a few years back, but that it was never solved. Lord British, what are you doing in the castle? Get out and investigate what's going on instead of just leaving it to others. Unfortunately, his specialty seems to be delegation, and he doesn't seem to care all that much that there's so much trouble in the world. Even a brief visit to any of the towns would have revealed a whole lot of problems. The integration of the gargoyles after the events of Ultima 6 is far from seamless, especially in Vesper, where an all-out battle between humans and gargoyles is about to break out. What are the people supposed to do when their king doesn't do anything, and the so-called Avatar has vanished? So I went to meet Batlin in person, in the hopes of getting some answers. He's in charge of the Fellowship at Britannia. He is charismatic, but elusive, not really revealing anything about himself, but does his best to get to know the Avatar by asking multiple ethical questions. This is Ultima 7's version of the moral choices that help determine which character you started as in previous games. But in this game, Batlin uses your responses to try and manipulate you. It's eerie how sinister the questions become as Batlin tries to probe your intentions and beliefs. Batlin determines that the Avatar needs to be part of the Fellowship, but there are 2 requisites to joining. Batlin wants you to deliver a package to the town of Minok. It's not too long a trek to the northeast, but arriving in Minok, you are immediately confronted by a new tragedy. There are a group of gypsies that have migrated to the city and have done their best to be integrated into the community. 2 of them have been murdered in the same ritualistic way as the victims intrinsic. It's a bloody nightmare, and it's disturbing. Everyone in the town is in disbelief. Unfortunately, there's not many more answers here. You gather clues, drop off the package, get your fortune read, then have no choice but to return to Batlin, who gives you one more task. Go to the dungeon to start and retrieve some treasures that were lost within. Ultima 7 loves to throw you surprises. When I tried to find the dungeon, I ran into a virgin detecting unicorn who had a pretty interesting backstory involving an angry wizard who had cursed him. That plot thread was intertwined with some guy who'd been challenged by the woman of his dreams to prove his chastity by finding the unicorn and proving his virginity. Later on, I met this woman who'd sent him on the quest, and she seemed totally unimpressed with the guy despite his dedication. Love is complicated. Inside Destard, dragons roam, and if you're not careful, your party will be annihilated. If you're stealthy, you can sneak in and out, discovering the chest that Batlin had wanted is actually empty. I'm pretty sure it was a trap, and Batlin was hoping the Avatar would get killed. When I called him out on it, he shrugged it off and gave a token apology. But at least now, I was a member of the Fellowship. The initiation is really something. The Fellowship members attend, people share their personal stories. Honestly, if it wasn't for the murders, I could have mistaken the Fellowship as a force for good. The Black Gate is emblematic of the emptiness you've left behind. For all you know, the Red Guardian could be trying to do something honorable. As an absent Avatar, it wasn't like I had a moral claim or right to dictate to the people who they should or shouldn't follow. Nowhere is that more poignant than in Skara Brae. Skara Brae was once the city devoted to spirituality, but now it might as well replace spirituality with suffering, since Skara Brae is a dead city. As part of your quest to deal with the Fellowship, there's a certain item you need to gain from a mage named Alagnar. But in order to gain the item, Alagnar asks you to find out the answers about life and death from someone called the Tortured One in Skara Brae. It seems simple enough until you arrive and discover everyone's been killed in an explosion, and the only people you interact with are their dead ghosts. Even getting to the island requires a payment to a Quran-like figure that lets you ride the ferry across. You learn that everyone is under the curse of a lich after an explosion killed many of the villagers, but there are others who are suffering as well. The first person I met, Quentin, took a loan from a seedy figure to try to help his sick wife, but he couldn't repay the debt and was murdered in his sleep. His wife is now a tortured soul. I felt depressed just thinking about it. Further in the city, the blacksmith Trent has been driven mad with rage after his wife was taken captive and tries to build a cage to capture the lich, but is wandering his decrepit house in rage. When I finally caught up with the tortured one named Cain, it was a bleak exchange. He reveals his attempt to rid the city of the lich ended up destroying it because he got the formula for the potion wrong. He's lost all hope, and in an eerie way symbolizes a failed avatar who ended up destroying the city he wanted to save. He won't tell you the secrets to life and death unless you free the city from the lich's influence. You have to get Trent the blacksmith to finish the cage, then concoct the potion that destroyed the town, but do it right. At night, the spirits gather in a black mass. You capture the lich and awaken Horans. Then you have to get the mayor, who it turns out screwed up the potion in the first place, to sacrifice his soul so the others can get rest. After all your struggles, Cain finally tells you the truth. There are no answers, only questions. Ironically, it's this dark revelation that a younger Cain shared with a younger Batlin, the leader of the Fellowship, that led him down a road of nihilism. It got me thinking a lot about how even after helping Skara Brae, did I even make things better? Yes, I helped some of the spirits to find peace, but it didn't change the horrors they'd endured. As an avatar, shouldn't it have been my responsibility to take care of them? Was it wrong I left for those 200 years when all this took place? Could I have given Batlin a better answer? Was the Guardian able to give answers that the Avatar couldn't? Ultimately, I think that last question is what struck me the most. If the desolation of Skara Brae was what converted Batlin to the dark side, it was a journey I could understand, especially in light of how the mage who sent you doesn't have a happy fate either. After you tell Elagnar about Cain's revelation, he is murdered and his death is ghastly. This savior business is deadly. Batlin's distillation of the Fellowship to 3 principles makes sense on the surface. Strive for unity, trust thy brother, and worthiness precedes reward. In a nod to the disciplined nature of it all, every single Fellowship member you ask about the Fellowship's creeds will gladly talk about it but use the exact same language. I knew this was an intentional choice just by the sheer diversity of the dialogue in the NPCs, but while the Fellowship gives people meaning, it's also divisive, separating the believers from the unbelievers. Gorn, one of your trusted companions, at first seems delighted to see you, but then he realizes his religion won't let him interact with you. The Fellowship, despite seeming inclusive, is pretty exclusive. The conflicted nature of Gorn wanting to be your friend, but being prevented by the cult, struck me hard. I've had friends who've cut themselves off from society after their religious groups told them things like secular movies and games, for example Ultima or D&D, were evil. I could see the conflict within them as I'd casually point out how ridiculous that sounded, but it was as though they were at war with themselves. To see Gorn reject the Avatar and tell him to go away was profoundly disturbing. Ultima 7 doesn't shy away from showing the darker aspects of religion. I found a prison where dissidents were being tortured by a Fellowship troll who enjoyed his job a little too much. In the city of Moonglow, one of the clerks begins to suspect the Fellowship leader there, Rankin, of fraud. When Rankin hears about the suspicions, he tells you not to worry about it. The next day the clerk is gone, never to be seen again. As the overall story progresses, it's not too hard to figure out who's behind the Fellowship and what their true goal is. The disturbing part of it is that a lot of the horrors that happen are carried out by the humans. It's all the ways the game navigates these complex ethical and moral dilemmas that have made Ultima 7 my favorite game in the series and probably one of my top 10 best RPGs of all time. I honestly can't remember the last time a game, heck any movie or book, made me think this much about morality and organized religion. I did want to take a moment to acknowledge that there are some game mechanic issues that can be frustrating for modern players. Ultima 7 has a cluttered inventory management system that is hard to deal with. There are so many things you can get in every house, you'll have to create a system for yourself. For my part, I loaded important items on the barrels, on my magic carpet, and often spent time organizing. I was also ruthless in throwing away stuff I didn't need. Having to continually feed your party members can be cumbersome. Your party constantly complains about food. At the same time, hunger is something I'd gotten accustomed to from earlier Ultima games. I loaded up one of those barrels full of meat and then dispersed the food every morning. It felt oddly nostalgic for me, which made it more bearable. Finally, while the vast world is awesome, the frame rate, especially when the party increases in number, is janky. On top of that, the magic carpet and boat take up way too much real estate on the screen, so it's hard to see where you're going. I know these are quibbles, and I've heard a lot of these issues have been fixed with the player mod Exalt, so you might go that way. I unfortunately was not able to get Exalt to work on my playthrough. I wanted to end on a connection to the murder from the beginning of the game. I know most people will focus on the human victims, but there was also that gargoyle that was killed, Inamo. I went to the gargoyle town Turfin to deliver the bad news. The king of the gargoyles was saddened to hear the news, but not as much as his guardian who had raised him, Terragus. His sorrow was palpable and made me feel terrible about the tragedy. I was glad the developers showed there's a cost to the murders that isn't just limited to humans. There's a lot more I'd like to say, especially about the Forge of Virtue, which took me back in time to another one of my favorite games, Ultima 3 Exodus, but I hope to cover that in a future video where I'll go over the Forge and Ultima Exodus together. All in all, it was amazing to return to Britannia, and I'm so grateful to all the people who recommended Ultima 7. I've actually had a bit of a cold the past week, so apologize if I sounded a bit congested, but until the next video, see you next time, Avatar.